whole existence in Ahmednagar Fort. As is well known, there were both tactical and strategic differences within the Congress leadership, and these had been there since the outbreak of the Second World War. The party's leadership was, in brief, pulled in different directions over what attitude to take to the war, or what attitude to adopt on the war. These differences provided the background for some of the heated discussions within the close confines of Ahmednagar Fort. But there were also other, and in fact there were multiple polarizations apart from this question about what position to take on the war. These polarizations included attitudes towards the Muslim League between the left and right wings on the economic program of the Congress, and essentially also those between those predisposed towards confrontational postures vis-a-vis the colonial state and those who favored more measured and calibrated approaches. We get a graphic view of the different perspectives and approaches that existed through the eyes of the Delhi Congressman Asif Ali. One set of differences that persisted throughout the period of imprisonment was essentially about calibrating the intensity of confrontation with the government. The dividing lines were by and large very clear. Maulana Azad, Asif Ali, and Sayyid Mahmood formed one group. Another, led by Vallabhbhai Patel, included Shankar Rao, J.B. Kripalani, and Prafulla Ghosh. The balance of those in custody, such as Govind Ballabh Pant, Pattabi Sitaramaiah, and others, would generally follow Nehru, and it was to him that Maulana Azad and Asif Ali looked to getting the CWC to moderate its position about confrontation with the government. Asif himself was entirely convinced about the downsides of agitation. He wrote, quote, "I have remained a Swarajist all the time, that is, a believer in the parliamentary procedure," unquote. This was in a diary entry in August 1943 after a year of imprisonment. A year later, in August 1944, now after 2 years of imprisonment, his views were no different. The confrontation path adopted by the Congress at Gandhi's instance was a mistake. He wrote, quote, "In my opinion, 1942 was a wrong occasion. The entire war period should have been devoted to parliamentary activity. In the end would have come the award or otherwise a struggle. But Gandhiji and his group precipitated a crisis prematurely, and Jawaharlal simply abdicated his reason. And now we are in this quandary. Unquote. Certainly the frustration of being in prison during what he saw as a crucial period weighed heavily on Asif Ali, as indeed it did on the others. He was to write in July 1943, as the completion of a year's imprisonment neared, "I have been utterly out of tune with the working committee since the Allahabad meeting of April-May last year. I was with C. Rajgopalachari, and but for the Maulana, I would have resigned right then and been out of it all." He goes on at some length disagreeing with the line taken to confront the government on the particular issue, and he said that he had many disagreements about the final decision taken in the Bombay CWC meeting, but went along with it for reasons of party discipline. In Asif Ali's telling, Maulana Azad came to the conclusion in November 1943 that something needed to be done. A change in incumbency had taken place in New Delhi with Wavell, earlier the Commander-in-Chief of the Army in India, now the new Viceroy. The Maulana felt that the time was ripe for a reapproachment and for the Congress and for the working committee to write to the government to begin the process. In Asif's account, the terms of the communication would be that in view of the terrible famine conditions in Bengal and the government's resolve to carry the war to Japanese-occupied territories, the working committee was prepared to forget the past and cooperate with the government and all other parties. The idea was broached to Nehru and Patel first, who were not opposed to it per se, but wanted the new Viceroy to take the first step. Therefore, they, according to Asif, quote, hummed and hawed. Maulana Azad and Asif Ali wanted to take the initiative. Azad thereafter convened, or rather gathered together in the largest room, the Congress Working Committee members for a discussion which began on the 15th of November and went on for about a week. The outcome was predictable. Vallabhbhai Patel opposed and Nehru was lukewarm to the idea. There was no real chance of securing the outcome which Azad had wanted. The long confrontation was often acrimonious and heated. Asif Ali's sentiment at the end was, quote, the future is full of gloom if these people do not make up their minds about problems. They seem to expect too much from their masterly inactivity, unquote. For some in the Congress Working Committee to embark on a new line without Mahatma Gandhi's explicit approval verged on a kind of heresy. This group included Patel, P.C. Ghosh, Shankar Rao, and perhaps others too. In Nehru's words, quote, to criticize any step taken by Bapu is less majesty. That is the hiatus between the so-called Gandhi members of the Working Committee and the others, unquote. Similarly, Asif Ali was to write, quote, Patel and the others rely on Gandhi to do everything for them, unquote. Nehru, he felt, was in the same category. Notwithstanding the power of his analysis which made him disagree with Gandhi, in the end he would fall in line. In any event, at the end of this prolonged, intense consultation for about 10 days about the future course of action, when it became clear that the majority would not go along with him, Azad spoke again in conclusion. He threw out, in Nehru's description, quote, a very remarkable and significant hint about the communal problem. This was that we should tone down a little towards government, but not giving up in our position in any way, but still tone down, and then with its help, we should be able to solve the problem easily, unquote. Nehru wrote further in his diary, quote, this took my breath away, for it opened up new vistas, entirely new approaches. If this was the objective, then obviously the old arguments built on different premises hardly applied, unquote. Nehru's response and surprise suggests as if a novel point had been raised for the first time. This, in fact, was not so. And since the formation of the Congress ministries in 1937, there had been much discussion about the growing distance between the Congress and Muslim public opinion. The Muslim League certainly made much of this, but in the eyes of many Congress leaders, this could be disregarded. After all, it was a party which had been worsted in the 1937 elections and therefore lacked credibility. Yet there were others who were concerned at the rapid growth of the Muslim League and how this was exposing the shallow roots the Congress had put down amongst Muslims. These concerns grew following the resignation of the Congress ministries. Rajgopalachari, for one, was convinced that the Congress now faced a real problem, both of the Muslim League consolidating itself and of its own growing distance from Muslim public opinion. To a great extent, this both flowed into and from his larger concern that the Congress should not, post-resignation, move into an agitational phase against the government, especially when the British had their backs to the wall in the war against Germany and Japan. Others, too, had been sounding warnings on these lines, most prominently, the Muslim members of the working committee. Some fragments of these conversations, disputes, and contestations survive, and these bring out the divergences over how to tackle the Muslim League and how to tackle communalism, what should be the nature of Indian federalism, and more generally on the question of the interface of a minority with the majority. For instance, since the Cripps mission, one concept which had generated much discussion was that of self-determination for the Muslim majority provinces. In Asif Ali's view, this was a reality which had to be faced. Nothing is easier for me, he wrote. Quote, nothing is easier for me, he wrote in March 1944, than to say that Pakistan is most undesirable for India as a whole and for the Indian Muslims in particular. But if we refuse to have anything but the best, the situation may get worse. In the evolving world, we have often to be content with the second or next best. Unquote. To him, therefore, if indeed this was inevitable, recognition of the problem of self-determination was to be preferred to a union that was forced. Quote, if there is to be a Pakistan, a treaty will have to be negotiated with it. But in discussions with Nehru, the different ways in which this issue could be looked at also became clear. Quote, Jawaharlal Nehru made it clear in the end that the big economic plan by which he intended to tackle the problem of India's poverty would not be realizable if the communal tangle continued to come in the way. And therefore, he would rather, of course unwillingly, let the Muslims separate where they could. He would then have a strong central government in the rest of India and could proceed with his economic program. Unquote. And there is much more on these lines about this view about if you cannot reach an agreement, even if you don't like the idea of Muslim self-determination, it is nevertheless better to come to a negotiated agreement rather than things drift. And this particular subject was, of course, the subject of many acrimonious discussions, and it figures very largely in the diaries of all those who were confined in Ahmednagar Fort in this period. All of these, as I said, were current themes